You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're talking about monsters. That's right, it's Monster Mania on the podcast, and on this episode, we're talking about Kaijus and Cryptids. Here we go. Welcome back to the Fan2Fan Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Bernie Gonzalez. With me, as always, fellow co-host Pete Charbonneau, and it's Monster Mania on the Fan2Fan Podcast. We've been talking about monsters, not just any monsters. We've moved up the chain from literary monsters that wore capes and lived in coffins to city-stomping giants that would level skylines. On our first episode about monsters, we talked about those early cinematic monsters that were gothic. Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the classic Universal era. They weren't creatures destroying cities, they were tragic, they were cursed, they were monsters that lived in castles, surrounded by fog-covered villages, and their stories rooted in folklore and superstition, fear of the unknown. And then something changes. World War II happens. It's not just about a creature lurking in the forest. Now it's about extinction. It's about radiation, the bomb, from gothic to gigantic.
What would happen, they wondered, if they fired a neutron at a uranium nucleus, already the heaviest in nature? Why not try? So they tried. And the result? Nuclear fission.
July 1945, Alamogordo, New Mexico. Watch the first atomic detonation in history. Operation Trinity. The long series of nuclear tests is underway.
Welcome to the atomic age. Them, tarantula, alien invaders, unstoppable blobs. Everything gets bigger, including the anxiety.
Now, as you can imagine, feeling is running pretty high about now, and there's reason for it. If everything goes according to plan, we'll soon see the largest explosion ever set off on the face of the Earth.
And then in 1954, everything shifts again. Japan releases Godzilla. And this is where the true kaiju era really ignites. For the majority of people, I think it's probably fair to say, Pete, King Kong could be classified as a kaiju. But when I think of kaiju, I think of Godzilla. Same for you?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I grew up watching the goofy 70s Godzilla movies. They still hold a great place in the annals of my mind. I can remember going to see at the Smithtown Theater in, I want to say, 1977. I think it was, in America, it was titled Godzilla on Monster Island, which I believe is Godzilla versus Gigan. To be able to actually see a Godzilla movie in the theater at a matinee, for me at that age, we're talking kind of my awareness like coming online. Like, so Star Wars had come out the summer before. Now I get to see Godzilla movie, which at the time, again, no internet. So I believe that came out a couple of years after it was released in Japan, but I didn't know. I hadn't seen it on TV. So as far as I was concerned, I was seeing a brand new Godzilla movie in 1978. Felt like I won the lottery.
From beyond the stars come the most fearsome monsters in the galaxy. Only Godzilla stands in their way in Godzilla on Monster Island. Is even Godzilla strong enough to defeat the invaders? Matching unbelievable strength, exchanging incredible devastating rays. Don't miss Godzilla on Monster Island. Rated G.
The thing about Godzilla that kind of goes back to the atomic age stuff, we get like nuclear proliferation, the atomic age. Like, there's a lot of that stuff there. The charming part of it is us growing up watching those Godzilla marathons and very obviously seeing the man in the suit of it all. There's something about kaiju that like is its own monster genre. I wanted to look up the word because it is indeed a Japanese word. It means strange beast. Open ghenough where you could use it for a number of different things where, yeah, King Kong could be a kaiju by that definition, just like Godzilla certainly is. Mothra, King Ghidorah, Gamera, Gigan. The one thing that's interesting, though, is that when I think of kaiju, right, like you think of Godzilla stomping around Tokyo, destroying the military, destroying cities, but a genre within the genre is like kaiju on kaiju action.
It's a monster Monster Marathon. Now all in one gigantic show. 3 of the newest and most exciting monster hits, starring Earth champion and protector Godzilla. First, thrill the Godzilla on Monster Island with more monsters than have ever appeared on the screen at one time. Then it's the action-packed Godzilla versus the Cosmic Monster. And finally, the classic Godzilla versus Megalon. All 3 in one colossal show. Rated G.
The one thing that's interesting about kaiju movies that might be a little different from, say, them or Tarantula, when I think of those movies, sci-fi movies to me. When I think of Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, if I have to open up the video store, Fan2Fan Video, Pete, and Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and we got to put it on the shelf, I think that goes in fantasy, right? Oh, do we put it in adventure versus kaiju, where it feels like a kaiju film can be a sci-fi film, certainly could be an adventure film. It's a fantasy film. Some of them lean more into the horror of it all. I don't know if I would call them horror, but that's the thing that's interesting about kaiju films when you look at them through like this monster lens. They actually can be a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, you've got aliens involved in a lot of those Godzilla movies, always trying to, take over the earth. Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's why, one of the reasons why, and I've said this before on the show, like I hate when things try to get pigeonholed too much, because there's so much movies, art, what have you, that really stand astride different genres. And I think, to your point, you've got a whole mishmash of them here. I was thinking earlier, just the term like monster movie when I was a kid, that's what I would call all this. Like it was like a good catch-all. Like I would just be like, oh, monster movies are on. I want to watch a monster movie. Something like Sinbad. I think if it had the Cyclops in it, or there's the one with the dragon, and there's other fantastic beasts in it, I probably would have, as a kid, call it a monster movie. Even though technically it's not. Really, there's monsters in it. But for me, that was always a good catch-all. Like, monster can encompass a whole lot. So I feel like kaiju's the same way. Like there's, like when you get in the earlier original Gojira, it's just Godzilla is not battling any other creatures. And obviously in tone, very much a response to, the nuclear bombs falling on Japan, and very much a cautionary tale, very serious, sober, and somber. Mm-hmm. And then once you get to, certainly from when I was growing up and watching the Godzilla movies, I mean, Godzilla's drop kicking King Ghidorah and doing all these weird dances and shit. It's just like,
But I think to your point, like 54 is the release of Godzilla, the serious, somber version.
Godzilla, king of the monsters, whose death ray blasts the city from the face of the earth before your very eyes. Godzilla alive, stalking across the world, crushing all before it. Is Godzilla fantasy or a prophecy of doom? For the answer, see Godzilla, King of the Monsters. A tale of horror more fantastic than any ever written by Jules Verne. More terrifying than any ever shown on the screen. Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Incredible titan of terror. A story to stun the mind as the gargantuan creature of the sea surges up on a tidal wave of destruction to wreak vengeance on the earth. Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Fantastic beyond comprehension. Beyond compare. Astounding beyond belief. The mightiest monster of all. Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
And then in 63, we get King Kong versus Godzilla. I think that's when I remember as a kid thinking, this is the one I want to watch. I want the drop-kicking, googly eye version of kaiju now, because that other one was a little too serious, and I don't know that if I want Perry Mason in my kaiju films.
A prehistoric monster the Japanese call Godzilla has just walked out of Tokyo Bay. He's as tall as a 30-story building. Now he's making his way toward the city's main line of defense. 300,000 volts of electricity strung around the city is a barrier. A barrier against Godzilla.
Now I want like a 3-headed creature, and there's a mechanized version of Godzilla, and his name is Mechagodzilla. Sign me up. How do I get those pajamas for Christmas? But there is a version of this of kaiju that we think of that's like, it can be like, I think of Godzilla -1, where it's treated with much more prestige. You're still talking about like failure of bureaucrats and the military and all the politics of it all. And by the way, in the background, there's a big ass monster that's stomping around the city, but very different from some of the monster flicks that we saw, the kaiju flicks we saw growing up, where a little kid that's friendly with Mothra and Mothra being like,
I often likened it when I was a kid to the original Godzilla. For me, was almost like eating your vegetables. Like, I certainly enjoyed watching it. But to your point, like if there was a Godzilla marathon and like I knew all week was like a different Godzilla movie, like I kind of ticked off which ones were the ones I really wanted to see. And then the other ones were kind of like, well, of course I'm going to watch it, but I'm not going to like it as much as, you know, Terror of Mechagodzilla or something like that. Like as goofy as it was, like that's the fun stuff because it's just like, you know, just insane Godzilla fighting whoever. I used to get pissed off. I know Mothra has many legions of fans, but when I first saw Godzilla versus Mothra or Godzilla versus the Thing or whatever it's called and Godzilla loses, I was so pissed off. To this day, I still have a grudge against Mothra because of that.
Damn you, Mothra. Damn you to hell.
Godzilla. Terror monster of the motion picture screen meets The Thing. Godzilla versus The Thing. Innocent looking, but so feared pagan man worshipped it. See the battle of gigantic forces spreading terror across the world. Can man's inventions conquer them? See in color, Terrorscope. Godzilla versus The Thing.
You mentioned aliens in the world of Godzilla's rivals into the 70s, and maybe this also has to do a lot with what was going on in the 70s, fear of invasion, paranoia, cosmic anxiety. Like as we kind of see into the universe, there's a universe. Maybe we're not as big as what we think we are, and maybe we might be even insignificant in the grand scheme of things. That's when you get movies like Alien in 79, The Thing in 82, Predator in 87. I don't know that I would call all of those creatures monsters, but I don't know. There's also an argument to be made that, yes, they're aliens, but in some ways are the Martians in War of the Worlds from 1953 monsters? Well, they're aliens to me. But I guess you could, if you're opening up the aperture for the definition of monster, they could be monsters.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think, if you want to have like the widest aperture possible, all this stuff is monsters. Like it's easy to taxonomy it in some way. Like the subgenre is like, they're all monsters, but then you've got your aliens, you've got your kaiju giant monsters, you've got your mythical beasts monsters over there, you've got your cryptid monsters over here. Taking a quick step back, now that we're kind of making our way into the 70s, which is really the era that I grew up in, there's so many movies that scared the shit out of me as a kid that when I've watched as an adult, I'd be embarrassed to say that they scared me as a kid. But some of the same themes that you saw in the 50s and 60s, but now they're in color. Now it's real. Movies in particular, I remember watching Track of the Moon Beast, another Mystery Science Theater classic, and I think one just called Snow Beast. A lot of beasts in the 70s, which I found out later I think was just a TV movie.
It's winter carnival time at a crowded ski resort, and a killer beast is on the loose.
You won't believe me either. Nobody will ever believe me.
Well, what's more important, finding your friend or trying to convince us that there's some kind of monster out there?
This wasn't an animal. And it wasn't human either.
Bo Svensson and Yvette Mimieux star in a big event thriller, Snow Beast. Tuesday, June 6th at 9, 8 Central and Mountain.
Those two movies scared the shit out of me as a kid. Like I was just, hell no. I don't want any part of that. The Snow Beast, there were these shots, Abominable Snowman, like attacking a ski resort in the 70s. Clint Walker, Bo Svensson, Yvette Mimieux, like you can't get any more 70s than the cast you've got in that one. But there's like some like establishing shots at the beginning of that's just like the camera panning like the mountain slope. And for the life of me, I was like picking out the Snow Beast in like the trees watching that. And I'm like, no. Nope, not going to any ski resorts anytime soon. And I think in the 70s, aside from the fact that I was really young and impressionable and had a creative mind, so like everything was all heightened, I think a lot of those movies benefited from the technology that they were shown on. So we had like a 13-inch TV, And then we had a bigger one in the basement, but the quality was the quality of the 70s. These are not 4K experienced films, so they were grainy. They sometimes gave them that, Legend of Boggy Creek's another one. Like, again, like you watch it now and you will probably laugh your ass off. But when you're 8, 9, 10 years old watching it in the 70s and you're like, oh, this creature might exist somewhere. The graininess, the darkness did these movies a lot of favors because you could not see the rubber suit. You couldn't see the zipper in the back of the costume. Rob Bottin talked about this while making The Thing, which is obviously on a much different level than the movies that I'm talking about here. But he talked about how shooting in shadows really helps with the visual effects because it can hide a lot of the stuff that if it was like really well lit, it's probably taking you a little bit out of the immersion of what he's trying to accomplish, which is, to scare the pants off you. So, 70s was like a really wild time to grow up in when you've got all that stuff.
I think Moon Beast and Snow Beast is a perfect transition because we've been talking about kaiju, towering city, flattening forces of nature. Now, what happens when those monsters get smaller? Again, we get a different type of creature, a different kind of monster called the cryptid.
On evenings like this, I like to curl up with a good book. The sort of book that lets the imagination run away with you. If you're like me and enjoy the mysterious and the unexpected, you'll love The Enchanted World. A fascinating new series from Time Life Books about the legends, myths, and folktales of ages past. Only remember, once you're lured into the enchanted world, there's no telling where your imagination will take you.
To order your first book, call now, 1-800-453-3900. It will be sent to you free for 10 days. Keep it and pay just $14.95 plus shipping and handling. Others will follow about one every other month. Keep the ones you want. Cancel anytime. So call 1-800-453-3900.
Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, Mothman, monsters that are not necessarily born of radiation from like the atomic age or even Godzilla and his pals on Monster Island. Now we're talking about ancient myths and lore, creatures that could be out in the woods right now, maybe have been out in the woods or in our lake for decades, for centuries. And if kaiju represent global fear after World War II, extinction level threats, you get the other side. You get another perspective in cryptids that live more on the margins of the maps, the blurry photos, eyewitness testimony, campfire stories.
We are now flying over some of the wilderness areas of northwestern United States and Canada. Here there are thousands of square miles of uninhabited wilderness that is still unexplored. It is in these vast, unexplored wilderness areas of North America that a 9-foot-tall, human-like creature is reported to live. This is the home of the Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, as the Indians call him.
It's a different part of the monster conversation, but definitely part of the monster conversation, and one that we grew up with because cryptids were everywhere. We just didn't at the time have the term cryptid to name that genre of monster. There's Mothman that had sightings in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and very much is associated with the collapse of the Silver Bridge. There were renewed investigations into the Loch Ness Monster. You had Skunk Ape that was out there in the Florida swamps, the Jersey Devil, the Flatwoods Monster, the Enfield Monster in my stomping grounds of Illinois, the Loveland Frog in Ohio, the Dover Demon, and of course the big daddy of them all, Sasquatch, aka Bigfoot, that had an explosion of sightings in the Pacific Northwest during the 60s and the 70s. You had the famous 1967 Patterson Giblin film that kind of went into pop culture status. Bigfoot was everywhere.
$6 Million Man fought Bigfoot, for crying out loud.
We grew up in an era where Bottin, Baker, Winston, these creative people with new toys. And when I kind of go through the video store in my head, Pumpkinhead, that's a monster, but also a byproduct of advances in special effects. Stan Winston and being able to do things with his team that had not been done before. But then I think of something like the Babadook, also a creature. And I don't know if its roots are in like demonic supernatural stuff, but it's still a monster, I guess, by any definition. fascination. That is more cemented in grief. The Nosferatu movie you saw last year, very different from the 1920s Nosferatu film. And there's a little bit more agency now in especially the female characters.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because they're just being made for a different audience. That's just kind of neat to see those reinterpretations of the monsters. I think of like Death Note, a manga, kids who find a journal, and in that journal, they can put their thoughts. And some of those thoughts might be your worst thoughts about how if this person wasn't alive, then they wouldn't bully me anymore. Taking that logic further, well, what if the journal allowed a demon to show up and that demon took care of the bully for you? What are the implications of that, of like a vengeance of a demon monster taking your thoughts that you just put into a journal and making them come to life, and that person isn't sitting in class anymore? That's a nuance that I never saw in monster flicks growing up, but now kids get the benefit of seeing monsters that reflect the things that worry them. Same thing, like the same things that we saw when we were growing up and our parents saw.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, like the aperture opening up, the number of voices that are now playing in that sandbox is like so wide open compared to what it used to be. And so you're getting everyone's personal interpretation of what either scares them or something that they feel is like a universal fear that they can translate into, again, on some level, like this is meant to entertain. So it's like taking a very real fear, but making it palatable so that it goes down and people could then choose to, and you can just purely enjoy it for the scare factor, as I certainly did for much of my younger years. I was thinking about that too, how, before I was old enough to understand the allegories to a lot of these films, I just wanted to be scared. There was just something visceral about that, whatever's embedded in our DNA going back to early humans of like the fight or flight type thing, like that fear, it builds something up in you. I feel like there's some of that fear factor in monster movies, also in sci-fi on a different level. That's a little more like wonderment.
And that makes sense because when you're talking about kaiju, you're talking about cryptids. Again, it's hard to categorize. Is it sci-fi? Is it fantasy? It doesn't matter. It's stuff that we grew up with and stuff that we don't necessarily, like you were saying, like put in one just specific category and it's got to be that. It's a lot of different things. Like those man-in-suit Godzilla movies, they were just fun. They were Saturday morning movies that entertained us, and we could see how goofy they are, but we also saw how they originated from the atomic age and the discovery of nuclear power to more modern day movies like, again, Godzilla Minus Zero. All of this stuff is just byproducts of their time. And it's just like, again, just like you said, Pete, it's kind of cool that we've grown up, that we grew up in this era, that we could watch Gamera marathons, that we could get Time Life books about Bigfoot, that we were exposed to these other types of monsters. But I think because we love John Carpenter on the podcast, he is also a fan of all things kaiju, specifically Godzilla. So why not give the last words to the master of horror himself, John Carpenter, talking about Godzilla.
Hi there, I'm John Carpenter. You might know me as a horror movie director, but right now, what I'd really like to be known as is a giant Godzilla fan. Gojira has a mood that all the other movies didn't have. See, when I was a kid, I knew all about the atomic weapons and the fact that they were going to kill us all if they hit. And Godzilla was a big atomic weapon walking around with a radioactive breath. I didn't see Gojira when it was first out. I saw the Americanized version, which is cleaned up a lot. And they covered what it was like to the Japanese people. The somber, oh my God, the devastation. That was pretty intense. So I loved that. I ate it up.